I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to Sleerickets, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This is an important episode. This is a big episode. It is big, first, in that it is longer than average. But this is an episode featuring some big Sleerickets personalities, including two who have never been on the show before. I went to Cleveland a few weeks ago at Elijah's invitation and read alongside Ryan Wilson and David Clark. And then we went back to Elijah's house and recorded an episode live all in the same room, which is something I have done only once before. At the table were Elijah, Brian Brodeur, who drove in from Indiana, George David Clark, and Ryan Wilson. George David Clark goes by David, which is what we call him on the recording. You also will hear some other names I'll mention in a moment, but David and Ryan are both excellent poets. They both have new books of poetry out, both from LSU Press, along with Maury Creech, who has a book out now from them as well. So David's book is called Newly Not Eternal. Again, it's published under George David Clark, Newly Not Eternal, and Ryan's book, In Ghostlight. The other reason this is sort of an important occasion is that the final issue of Literary Matters has come out. There will be a retrospective issue, but this is really the last issue Ryan has edited, and probably the last proper issue of the magazine altogether. We'll see. There's some things are up in the air, but Literary Matters, as we know it, has come to an end. It had a really good long run. We will talk about that in the conversation. I'm not going to try to describe what's in the final issue. It is a lot of really great stuff. I will say, by way of self-promotion, that I have a book review in there. I haven't written a book review in a long time. I kind of stepped away from it, but I came back to write one for the last issue about Maury Creech's book. So go check that out. I will put a link in the show notes. Go also check out 32 Poems, which is the magazine that George David Clark, still edits. In the conversation, there are few names I should clarify, just because they might not be entirely clear otherwise. We were at Elijah's place. I don't mention in the recording, but that is also Laura's place, his fiance. So they lived there together. Laura was also very generous in allowing us to come have our annoying writer party there. And Elijah's mother sat by and listened to the whole conversation, which was very sweet of her. I had a really lovely conversation with her at the bar beforehand. I thanked her for her patience and interest, and she nodded and smiled politely, and she then explained that the sofa in the room where we were recording was her bed for the night. So she was also waiting for us to leave so she could go to fucking sleep, which fair play to her and Blumoff. Thank you to her and to everybody. So Brian Brodeur is at the table. He chimes in a little bit, but mostly you'll hear from Ryan and David, who talk about editing philosophy, some editing tips, regrets. Again, David in this recording is pretty much always referring to David Clark. There's also once or twice we mentioned Dave. That is Dave Smith, who is a venerable poet and the former chair of the John Savikins writing seminars back when Ryan and Brian and Joanna and I were there, and boy, did that man dislike me. He's come up on the podcast before, but we mentioned him a little bit. We also mention... I can't remember now. It took me forever to edit this for reasons Alice will understand, but Brian in this recording is Brian Brodeur, not Brian Platzer. And then I think most confusingly, once or twice, there's a sort of a funny pivot where the only indication that I am switching from one you, say Ryan, to another you, say David, is my eye contact and delightful in-person gestures, which of course don't translate over the mic. All right, so we're here in the home of Elijah Blumoff with Ryan Wilson, George David Clark, Brian Brodeur, and Elijah's attractive mother, who's also very well educated and thoughtful and
knows poems.
Yeah, those poems. You write? Wait, do you write poems? Oh, wait a minute. Wait, not really.
I've been written a long time.
Okay, all right, okay. All right, so Ryan, you have just, if I promise not to release this until after you are done being editor of Literary Matters, you will have just finished editing Literary Matters for 7 years? 8 years?
Yeah.
Which is 3 years longer than Dave Smith advised any man edit anything.
Correct.
Let's start with highlights. Let's start with the best parts. What were some of the best parts? Because I know there were some challenges as well.
Yeah.
But what were some of the things that were like? Because there were a number of times you would either send me a text or we'd talk on the phone and you would say, if I could tell my 20-year-old self about the exchange I just had, it would blow his mind.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, at first we're all together, and thanks Elijah for hosting us. And also we all have beverages more or less. So, cheers. Nunc est bibendum.
Cheers.
Right. So some highlights. I don't know. One hesitates to list them because one would leave out important things. But getting a batch of poems from Grace Schulman unsolicited for the first time was fantastic. It was in the mail, and it was just like, what? That's crazy. And getting poems from Jean Valentine and Charlie Simic and Stephen Dunn and so many of the people that are now gone that were heroes of mine for many years.
Someone had to swim a letter across a river from Fred Chappell to get to.
Yeah, old Fred didn't do email, so we had a snail mail correspondence, and running things from Fred was great. And then, publishing younger people that are tremendous, like some of the folks at this table, actually all of the folks at this table, to create a venue with a lowercase c Catholic aesthetic that didn't pigeonhole. I tried not to pigeonhole the magazine into one particular aesthetic approach or one theoretical approach. I wanted to bring in whatever was good from as wide a variety of perspectives and approaches as I could, and have a kind of big tent operation. And I feel that, we were successful to some degree, at least, in that endeavor. And I think that's an important endeavor, to avoid creating an agglomerate of isolated echo chambers in the literary community. Saying the literary community with the definite article implies that there is one, and I think that there should be one, and not a bunch of splintered people. That we need to be able to talk, we need to be able to meet each other and appreciate what's good in each other, even if we disagree. As you know, since you and I are best friends and don't agree on anything.
Yeah, that's true. So, all right, so this is something I feel like I have, if I were to listen to myself, I've been a hypocrite about, because I think of a contrast between Christian Wyman and Don Scher as editors of poetry. And there's plenty to say about both, and I both, I have only heard personally wonderful things about and have experienced some of those things personally. But as editors, they had divergent philosophies, on a couple things, but just in very broad terms, I think Christian Wyman published poems that he thought were really good. And a lot of people disagreed, a lot of people did not like his taste, but he had a taste. And under him, poetry had a particular flavor, and you sort of knew you were getting something, even if it wasn't, sort of to me, it's like listening to a college radio station. I know whoever's running the radio right now loves this song. Mm-hmm. Even if I don't, somebody is really into this. Under Don Scher, it was a sort of an anthology of all anthologies. It was every month was a thematic issue with representations and samples of Irish poetry, Indian poetry, this group, that group, this set of concerns, that set of concerns, and it was way broader, you could argue, in terms of the number of people and the number of places and backgrounds that were brought in, but there was also nothing remotely like a poetry magazine style. And I have in the past complained about that approach because it feels to me a little bit like nobody's really into this. It's just that we feel like we're doing our homework by publishing this. But at the same time, in the work I've done for LM, I have tried to, in fact, like probably the majority of what I've passed along to you or Armin have been poems that I didn't especially like, but reading them I thought like, oh, okay, something's going on here. Like this is weird and I don't like it even, but like I cannot deny that there's something very smart and very interesting happening here. Is there a contradiction there? Are those extremes worth marrying? Am I thinking about this all wrong?
Well, I don't know. I think whenever we set up dichotomies, it's very easy for them to be false dichotomies. Yeah. And my instinct is always to seek an aurea mediocritas.
All right. For all the idiots here, we'll speak English, please. Let's also speak English, please.
The golden mean. That's from Haars, from Ode 210. But the middle, right? Rather than all one way or all the other. So, my approach, it was more or less, I wanted poems that were poems, by which I mean, at least on a basic level, pieces of writing that fulfilled their own requirements, successfully negotiated whatever rules they happen to be working by, and sort of leave it at that. I published poems that I thought were very successful on their own terms that are very, very far from what I would take off the shelf at night to read for pleasure, but with an awareness of the kinds of terms that they're working with, where they're coming from, the sort of lineage out of which they're coming. And, if it's successful in those terms, that seems to me satisfactory.
And like in poetry, with prose, it's even more true, but like you published a lot of stuff that you intensely disagreed with.
Yes.
You just wanted to make sure it was done well.
Right. Because I think that's what my job was, and it's the reader's job to read, or hopefully not a job, hopefully a pleasure, but to read a variety of approaches, and maybe find something that you like that surprises you that you like it. Maybe find something that you disagree with, but a point that makes you think and revise how you think. I ideally want to have a wide variety of visions all come together, and the reader can let the poets and the writers speak for themselves, and the reader makes sense of what they've read for themselves. That is, while I am, as a teacher, I think I can be maybe autocratic. As an editor, I didn't want to be that at all.
In surveying the landscape of literary magazines as you were putting LM together, was there an approach? Did you feel like there was a lacuna that you wanted to fill? That there was something that other magazines weren't doing that you really wanted to do?
Well, I don't want to say that no other magazines were doing, but I would say that I was seeing a trend toward polarities and toward insularity in different directions, all kinds of different directions. But the journals started feeling increasingly limited and increasingly, as I said, what a boring figure, the echo chamber. But nonetheless, it started to feel sort of like, and I didn't like that. And I talked to everyone I talked to about some of these magazines. They were saying, what's going on? So yeah, I wanted to have, as I say, a big tent operation and welcome in people from all walks and all views. And if it's good writing, it's good writing.
David, you're also a magazine editor. I think we've all had have had to make various aesthetic choices and groupings, but you have a very similar role to Ryan's at 32 Poems, and ongoing. You're not a happy former editor, but a miserable current editor. How do you approach these questions? My way or the highway? Fuck all y'all.
A little more like that than Ryan. I think that I don't think I've ever published a poem that I don't like.
Okay.
I've published plenty of poems that I was surprised to like them. That they were, and I think that was something that myself and the other associate editors are kind of shooting for. That the poem that we might be most excited about is the poem that we convince ourselves is a 32 poems poem, but unlike anyone that we've ever previously published in the magazine. So to surprise ourselves that this still seems to fit the aesthetic would be a goal, that we would have that experience a couple times in every issue. So I'm not sure we're really saying the same thing when you're talking about discovering that it is good writing, even if it's not what you would naturally pick up off the shelf. We'd like to be as eclectic as possible within the parameters of the thing that we think we do well.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of schools that probably aren't right for us, but we'd like to keep expanding and surprising ourselves by what we can include in the conversation.
You said during the reading that and it's a line I know I've heard you use in other contexts. It's a good line that you want poems that was it please or answer to the eye, the ear?
Appeal to,
Appeal
or
to.
Please is fine too.
The eye, the ear, and the what was that?
Ego.
The ego.
The ego. Yeah. So that still seems like a broader definition than what you're describing right now.
No, I think it's the same thing. Those are three pretty central pleasures, and I think there's a lot of poems that can appeal to those on those three fronts.
You did mention an aesthetic, though.
Yeah, and stuff you like. Like, surely there are a lot of poems out there that appeal to those three things without being poems you especially like.
Yes.
I assume.
I'm sure there are.
But I'm just curious. Like, how would you when you in like conversation with other. I don't know if the other editor if that's only Elizabeth or if there are other editors who work with
Elizabeth isn't part of the conversation usually about what we're going to publish.
Okay.
She handles everything else.
Okay,
She does the database and
the actual work to actually keep it going.
She'll answer any questions that the IRS has or anything like that.
She keeps you out of jail.
We've got a pretty great team of associate editors. I think our most recent edition has been with the journal for 4 years now.
Okay.
So many people who are on this team have been a part of the journal for 10 to 12 years.
Okay.
So we've got a pretty good sense of what the others are going to think about a particular poem. And it's a really convincing case when someone sends me an email and says, this isn't like something we've ever published before, but I think this should be a 32 poems poem.
Okay.
I think that's often a very successful argument to make when we're thinking through what we're going to publish.
So other than you know when you see it, porn definition, what is a 32 poems poem?
As a rule, they're poems that fit on a single page. We break that. It's just formally we get a lot of short lyrics that are heavily invested in sound. We're interested in free verse poems that are still aware of their own rhythms, that aren't dull to that side of sonic pleasure. And we're interested in metered poems that aren't just a patterning of beats, that are doing more with sound than that.
They put the middle button of their jacket, but not the top button.
Yeah. And they can unbutton the middle button from time to time too. Yeah, it's
okay.
It's just magnanimous.
And the neighbors are watching. And then the mailman.
We're looking for poems that are more than just their technique too. On the ego side, that I tend to be drawn to poems where it feels like there's something really at stake for the speaker of the poem, and that's not a ton of what we get. We get mountains of really competent, technically proficient poems.
Right. Okay.
Where we're not ultimately terribly moved by the stakes of the poem for the speaker. I think that's most of what we say no to. That's probably the reason why.
And the ego criterion is like, that's a sneaky one, because I think you probably are. That's narrowing the channel substantially, and I think in this way, like when I think about poems I've encountered in 32 poems, it's not that they never have a public or political dimension, but it is that the in some way, either the speaker or the poet or the central person in the poem is really on the hook. That we are speaking about an individual experience, an individual set of stakes, and not merely a broader abstraction or a broader social question.
Yeah, I think I could probably point to some exceptions that are doing more of the other thing, but that's a lot of what we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that in general you prefer poems that have an autobiographical element to them?
No, not at all. No. I think that I could be just as easily moved by the stakes for a fictional speaker than a speaker that is identifiably the poet. I love a poem in the third person every once in a while, and that omniscient speaker might have something meaningfully at stake in the poem. Yeah, so I don't think that we necessarily have a bias towards an autobiographical eye in the poem, though because we publish so many short lyrics, we do get a lot of those. Yeah. We wish that we had more narrative poems in the magazine, but that's hard to do in a short space. A space as constricted as ours, so that's a minority of what we publish, but something we're kind of always on the lookout for. The same thing for like really good metrical poems. We've got quite a few people on our team who write at least part of the time in meter and rhyme, but it's 10% of what we publish, maybe 20% tops.
It's something I noticed with LM, and I think it's in no small part because of your profile there, Ryan, but a lot of people would refer to us as a formal magazine. And I know you particularly went out of your way not to publish only or even chiefly formal poetry. That we really wanted it to be very, very open to free verse, but it seems sometimes as if regularly publishing any poetry in meter makes you a formal magazine. 32 Poems seems to have dodged that bullet to some extent. I don't see y'all get pigeonholed that way.
I see us on lists though that are form friendly.
Form friendly, which is different than right.
We're very friendly towards it, but it's a smaller minority.
Yeah. It's funny. For both of y'all, your most recent books, In Ghostlight and Newly Not Eternal, were they were not like out of character, but they were turns to some extent. Like I think of you, David, as being, I don't know why this may be totally unfair, but like my thought about you as a poet was you were a little bit dreamy-headed and formally loose. And in this collection, I think it's in part because there is such a powerful emotional center in the story you're telling about your son. The form was really muscular. Like, and there were a lot of those poems that were the kind of poems that, as somebody who writes in form, I thought like, I got it, now I feel lazy. Like I'm just doing these fucking iambic pentameter quatrains, and David's doing backflips and reverse abecedarians, and that insane little, was it like a manometer the way you did that necklace poem? But that was a sort of a little bit of a surprising turn. You always had a formal element to your poetry, but it didn't feel as taut as it is in this book. And then Ryan, part of what I really appreciated in Ghostlight is that it is a much lighter touch. Like you are, I think, like you're particularly Proteus Bound and The Stranger World are really impressive, but if they have a flaw, it's that they're so impressive that occasionally you think like, oh fuck, I don't know if I can. I gotta get a good night's sleep. I gotta eat a hearty breakfast. I gotta get ready for the SAT. Like, this is gonna be fucking hard. But In Ghostlight is such a light. It pretends to be more casual than it is, but it is a really light and fleet little book. I was kind of surprised to see that from both of y'all in slightly different directions. Particularly with your like crazy will sonnets, which I can't stop giving you grief for.
And rightly. You are correct in doing that. Well, I don't know. I don't know that I have anything to add to that. I'm glad that it seems like a lighter touch. It felt like that's what the book needed to be. It was very slight, very light, very, at least superficially kind of gentle, whereas, the first book, you're right, is very, very intense. So I don't know. I like playing with new toys, and I don't. Matthew, you're such a wonder at this, but at experimenting
for
and
any
doing
noun other than that.
At experimenting and doing different things, doing new things, and I don't think people who listen to your podcast probably know what an incredible playwright you are, but and just doing radically different things on the stage and pulling them off. For me, I think that's impressive. I want every book to be a different book, and to do a different thing, and so, that's the fun, I think, of writing is playing around and seeing what you can do and what you can pull off and where you can go that you haven't been before. I feel like my range is very narrow. I'm aware of it, so I'm always trying to push and experiment. It's an awful word, isn't it? Experiment. It doesn't mean anything, but play is really what it is. Play.
Do you know where that Warren line that Dave was always quoting comes from? He said, Warren said, supposedly he said, experiment is an elite word for failure. But I can't find the source of that quotation anywhere.
It may be Dave. I don't know.
Maybe Dave's imagining. Maybe it was something he
or that he
old
had
Red
read
said drunkenly.
Yeah.
In my memory, Dave kept in his breast pocket the photo of him with Red Warren. He would just take it out every other day to show. Just get a little sweaty and.
In his heart, he had that picture, but and still does, I suppose. But no, and that's just Dave did a lot of experimenting too, and some wonderful experiments with trying to adapt the Anglo-Saxon line in a way that Ted Hughes did and Seamus Heaney did, and then in his book Little Boats on Salvage that came out when we were I mean, the poems are pretty tight, and that elegy for William Matthews is a killer, and that elegy for Warren is a killer, and and then David done that strange book. You're going to have to help me on it. Is it called Fate's Kite? Which is all 13-line poems and one 14-line poem. And Dave is known for writing the big, long, narrative. But he's always been open to trying different things, and that's something I admire in him. I admire in you, and I admire generally because there are many people who figure out one thing and then just repeat it, and it starts to feel like a poetry factory. It starts to feel gray, even though there's a mastery of a particular thing. So I like to play around, and there's nothing more sophisticated than that. Just throw stuff at the wall. David probably has a much more interesting answer, so you should listen to him.
I kind of came to meter and rhyme later on. One of the reasons that I went to study with John Poach, the previous editor of 32 Poems, is that I sort of realized that was a deficit in my ear. By the time I finished the MFA, I knew that was something I wasn't very good at, and I wanted to think about rhythm more purposefully. And it took me a while before I felt like I was writing decent poems that were doing that. There's maybe just the tiniest bit of meter and rhyme in the first book, and then there's an awful lot of it in this one.
Yeah, you do the Cameron is the only one I know who supplied a term for it, though Campa has a whole essay about Cameron calls it a Curgina? It's the term Curginal, I think is the adjective.
David, what have you
I don't think I've got one of those.
No. But it's the term is apparently for taking a poem that is written in meter and breaking it up on the page so as to disguise that. And you do a lot of that in your book. I do plenty for the sake of publishing poems I couldn't publish otherwise.
I didn't think of it as disguising the meter and rhyme, but that I wanted to take some pressure off of the end rhyme and put more pressure on internal rhymes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So let us not forget that you Matthew, also have a book out, Midlife. And I want to ask you two questions. One is, how do you feel that you've progressed or changed from book 1 to book 2? And secondly, if you were the editor-in-chief of a literary magazine, how would you decide what to include?
Yeah. Well, I have no idea if and how I've progressed. I try to be pickier. I try to, be less in self-indulgent. But I don't have any clear vision of my own work or my own development as a poet, if that's the word for it. As for magazines, I think I would work really hard not to be the editor-in-chief of a literary magazine. In fact, I have worked really hard to not to be the editor-in-chief of a literary magazine.
But surely there are things you wish there are kinds of poems you wish there were more instances of being published.
Maybe. I think it's mostly I wish there were less. Like I wish, it's mostly I think there's so much poetry published, and we could probably do with less. Like there's Slavoj Žižek has the line he likes to. It's an old Polish joke about God coming to the farmer and saying, "I could either give you 5 cows and your neighbor 5 cows, or I could give you 2 cows and kill one of your neighbor's cows." Every time the poll takes the second option. And I think I would probably, as a literary magazine editor, I might do the same. I might say, like, if I could either be the editor of a literary magazine and decide everything gets published there, or not be the editor of a literary magazine and kill 2 literary magazines, I might do that. So I think there's a lot of good work being published. There's a lot of good work out there. It's just hard to see because the skyline's so crowded.
That's fair.
Yeah. That's probably my shitty answer. Brian, here's the thing, because I read your most recent book not long ago. It was also, by the way, there was one year when I helped screen the Marengoff, which is a long time and now defunct literary prize that LM facilitated for part of its existence. I read all of the submissions blind, and I helped narrow them down. There was one year where there was one guy who just kept turning in poems, and I thought, well, these should just be these poems. Like, these are just clearly like a head and shoulders above all the rest. And then it turned out they were yours. And I feel it was funny. Like, I didn't. Yeah, it was. I think I was annoyed at the quantity. That I was like, all right, he's already won. He's still there's more poems. You just send in 2. That's enough. That's plenty. But amid all the circle jerking, I have gotten the impression from you that you are actually a harsher critic than you let on. That, your persona is one that is very sunny and welcoming and all-inclusive, and yet your poems suggest to me that you might actually have a harder line. Mm-hmm. So if you were an editor-in-chief, I could see you getting brought on with Don Scher in mind, and then turning out to be, turning out to be like a crueler version of Christian Weinman.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I've done a little bit of editorial work, but I've never been an editor-in-chief, and so I've never been in the position of making actual decisions. But I remember one of the literary journals that I worked for, I fought very hard and lost to work with poets at editing their poems, and the editor-in-chief or the poetry editor just thought that was total anathema. And
it's also of all the thankless tasks, that might be the most thankless task in literature.
That's right.
Can I help you make this poem you submitted better?
That's right. I know, and I should have known better too, I guess. But I don't know. But I do still feel that way. I do still. I mean,
when you read magazines.
Yes. I mean, maybe it's a shitty thing to admit or something. But I'm sure that there are folks in this room who say the same thing. I mean, and of course, like, I'm especially interested to hear what David and Ryan have to say about this. I mean, like, I'm not sure how much actual editing of poems that you both have done in your various roles in LM and 32 Poems, but anyway, that was the thing that was one of the things that surprised me. Anyway, was how
in the experience
of being on an editorial staff of a literary journal, at how much of a no-no that was, and how I really just offended the editor, and how dare I edit these precious poems. That's not what I think that poems are. That's not how they're written. That's certainly not how they're edited by poets who actually know anything about writing poems and editing poems. So my thought was, well, if we're going to accept these poems, and we might be able to actually serve as editors, why shouldn't we at least make these suggestions?
I mean, amen, because God forbid the poem should be larger than the poet.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
Well,
yeah, that's exactly right.
Is there a particular kind of editorial change you would make? Like, did you see trends and, like, oh, it's this kind of thing again, or was it just all case by case?
This was years ago, but it was case by case. But the thing that I found maybe most of was, sometimes there was just a stumble here and there, and so I mean, like, the thing, anytime that you're editing anything, you're trying as best as you can to slip into the mind of the person who is writing the thing that you're supposed to edit, and then it's your job to try to make that thing achieve its final form, like to make it do everything that it can to be the best that it can be. Does it sound like an army thing?
All that you can do. Yeah. I just realized I've got these fucking things. It's like, why am I so hot in this room? Jesus, right? Because it's not going to, like, the sound is the sound at this point. Yeah, I think, like, my experience has been, if there's one kind of edit I have had the impulse to make consistently, it tends to be cut the last line or cut the last stanza. Like, cut this last little move, it actually is better if you just end right before that. I know we didn't do, like, a ton of editing, but I think, like, little edits were not uncommon. Particularly once we brought Cameron on, he always had he always had things he wanted to cut.
Cameron is very confident.
He is very confident. That's the right adjective.
For me, if I feel competent to make a suggestion, I will. But I lack Cameron's confidence, generally speaking. I think
you at 21 did not lack that confidence.
No, correct. When I was Cameron's age, I was much more confident with much less reason. But Maddie, I feel like with your poems, I have a pretty good feel, and I know how to move a thing around. And with some poems that come through, I feel like this is close enough to what I feel competent to do that I can make a suggestion. But in a lot of cases, I feel that I'm not competent to make a suggestion, and if I like the thing enough to publish it, I'll just run it. So there are also, of course, personal boundaries, and poets tend to be very sensitive, and one doesn't want to overstep, and so it is a balance to be respectful and also be try to be helpful, and so for me it comes down to a poem by poem case. Where do I feel like I actually this might be good, because it's the sort of thing where whenever I write something, I send it to Matthew and he knows what to do. He says, do this, done. And then I think, wow, why didn't I think of that? I'm a moron. And Brad Lighthouser has a similar touch. He's done a lot less than Matthew has, but Brad will just say, oh yeah, do that. And it's, oh, course. And so with people or with poems where I feel that there's something simpatico, I may offer a suggestion, but I don't want to remake other poets in my image.
Right.
I feel like that's a very dangerous approach to editing and life generally. So yeah,
That was brilliant. My one criticism is that you're foot tapping.
it is.
Yeah. There was actually a moment in like very, very late in the book, doing like putting together the midlife, where it was actually like a genuinely like heartwarming moment for me, because it had been a little while since I had sent you poems, and then I sent you a pretty good batch of some of the later poems to go into the book, and you wrote back, and we talked a little bit on the phone, but you sent these suggestions that were significant but very small, and like they were small in the number of words that were changed, but they made the poems I think much stronger, and like my feeling afterward was that I felt more like myself. Like it felt more like, oh yeah, I believe in these poems as being the kinds of things I can write when I'm at my best, more because of your hand in them.
Yeah.
That it felt like, oh, you know what this poem is doing as well or better than I do. So it can't, like, that has been a really, among all of the dispiriting things in poetry, like that has been one of the few really really heartening ones.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a special bond that we have, buddy, that we've had for so long, because we know what each other are doing.
You were one of two people I allowed to call me Maddie, for example. And the other one is a lot hotter than you.
That is not hard to believe. But yeah, with me it was mostly the prose. With the prose, I can be much more forward, and a lot harder probably to work with for writers.
Oh man,
sometimes
you were an athletic editor of prose.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, I saw some spirits broken under your editorship.
Well, that's interesting though. What makes you more?
You made it better. I mean, you made it much better. But yeah, sorry.
What makes you more confident about editing prose rather than editing poetry?
Myopic arrogance. I don't know. Just having a feel for what a thing is wanting to be. I think often in prose, it's harder to know where the piece wants to go, where it wants to end, how to give it a shape. A lot of people that are writing prose, especially critical prose, think of it like, high school students who don't care think about book reports, or college students writing an essay for class, and they don't think about making it pleasant to read or shapely or insightful. Of course, we've had so many wonderful, wonderful prose writers and great critics contributing to literary matters, and I'm always grateful when we get book reviews and critical essays that are sharp and good, because I think a healthy culture of criticism is essential for a healthy poetic culture.
Yes.
And so when I get a Brian Brodeur review or essay, I'm very, very excited. When I get a Matthew Buckley Smith review, I'm very, very excited. So it's a thing that is a dying art, criticism. There are not a lot of people that are doing it terribly well, especially among, I think, our generation and younger. It seems like it used to be very common, and now it's less common for people to do, the poems and then the poetry criticism. And so, Sherston Kaufman has done some terrific things.
Is she still doing it? Because I felt like she dropped off for a while, but she's really consistent and good.
Sherston's wonderful. I think she is having another
Just like 12
baby.
kids, so
I think this is 6 or 7.
Jesus.
but she's so wonderful, and she's a wonderful poet, and
Yeah.
but yeah, and so I'm always happy
Stephen
to
Campa
get that.
also.
Yeah, Stephen
Yeah.
Campa, terrific, and Stephen was at the reading with Maury.
Oh, was he?
He was on his honeymoon. Stephen has just gotten married
That's great.
to Abby Campa, who is going to Florida State for a PhD in creative writing with David Kirby and Barbara Hamby.
Oh, wonderful.
And they were on their honeymoon in romantic Reisterstown, Maryland.
What?
And it was so wonderful. I was talking to Mari, and I look up, and it's Stephen Campa. And I just lost my mind. It was so lovely, and he's so wonderful. But yeah, I mean, with the prose, if there's not clarity, if the sentences are baggy, if the paragraphs are without a shape, I feel much more confident making remarks on it and suggestions and that sort of thing.
But you can make the same critiques of poems, that they're not clear and that they're baggy.
One could, Elijah.
Yeah.
But I've been one who has benefited from Ryan's editorial advice in terms of critical prose, so I can speak, from a first-person perspective and say how useful his editorial eye has been. So I'm sure there are others listening who would say the same. So and of course that's the thing about editing anything, is that it's invisible. It's only good if the editorial work that an editor puts in is totally invisible. I mean, that's when it's good.
And there's been a number of...
And so therefore,
Yeah.
like, unthanked.
Well, right. I mean, I'm thinking of, like, there have been a number of not just for LM, but for like, there have been a number of essays and papers and talks given that passed over your desk that were later celebrated, in some cases, for theses that you were basically produced on demand by you because there wasn't a thesis available in the original document. Like, there's a lot of very good critical work that has gone out under other people's names because of your rigorous but also very generous editorship.
Well, that's very nice. I would say with Brian, I mean, your prose is so good. Very light touch with it, and the difference, Elijah, to come back to your thing, when Brian sends me poems, they're done. And they're self-evidently done. And when he sends me prose, I might be able to change a word or two or put in a comma or something. And that's it.
It has been, in some cases, much more substantial. I can attest. So just to thank Ryan publicly.
Yeah, but I'm sure you felt some of the same frustration that Brian is talking about, where you see a poem and you think it has promise, or you think it's good, but you wish that I wish this line were different, or I wish it ended in a different place, or something like that.
Yeah, and normally we turn those down.
Yeah. There is, I think, an experience you and I have had, sometimes together and sometimes separately, many times over, is reading a submission and thinking, like, oh, what a promising young student this is, and then discovering the author is like a 65-year-old tenured professor. I was like, oh, maybe you're not going to improve. Like, maybe this is it. Maybe you've peaked out here. But, like, seldom is it that... My experience is seldom like, oh, if not for these little adjustments, this would be a publishable poem. It's more like, oh, with some encouragement, this poet could grow into a really remarkable writer. It's just that usually you realize you've met them at the wrong end of their life.
I think that's a really important distinction, that we almost never publish things that the poem would be publishable if not for these things. But at 32 Poems, we very frequently send back notes. And they're almost always clarity issues like you're talking about, Elijah. But they're poems that we have already decided we want to publish it, and we'll publish it exactly the way it is right here. And yet I find myself tripping over this thing in line 3, and I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, but here's what's tripping me up. And I'd love for the two of us to think through it together. It's not a demand on the poem, but this is a place where I trip, it's 5 out of 6 times through the poem.
And it's a very subtle thing, but it's so much better as feedback than, why don't you do this? Like, just saying, like, here is the place in the poem where I have some trouble, and here's the kind of trouble I have here.
in line 15, I
Right.
realize that it's the boyfriend who's living at the halfway house.
Just
And
yeah.
And not
And-
the cat.
and I wonder if we should get that in line too. If we
Right.
should, because it's the girlfriend who's sitting on the steps, and then does that make sense? Like
no,
something
but-
like that.
Right, no, but
you know,
I
it's-
think like for me, definitely when I was younger, my impulse would be to come up with a solution and to offer like, why don't you do this? What if you did? And I think the wiser and ultimately more effective form of critical feedback is, here is the place in the poem I have an experience, and here's the experience I have. Take that information and adjust according to what you want me to experience.
Right.
That's exactly
So-
what happened when David sent me a note on a poem that's in the new book, Wind Advisory, that he was kind enough to run. He said,
And you
"Why-"
said David?
David, yeah.
Oh, this David. Okay,
This
because we
David.
know a bunch of Davids.
Yeah, that's right. But he said, this line that it doesn't really work. Give it another shot, and
Yeah.
it made the poem a lot better. That I went back in and improved that line. So thank you, David. That was well
you
done,
made
sir.
you made a comment earlier, Ryan, about poets having a thin skin
Yeah.
about some of this stuff, and that's not been my experience.
Yeah.
That it's almost universal appreciation for someone taking the time to wrestle with a line or two in your poem. Maybe like in 12 years of doing this, like a handful of people who have had their feelings hurt and don't respond positively, but much more really kind responses. You were talking about it being thankless, but it's rarely thankless back and forth with the poet. It's invisible in the magazine, but there's usually a lot of thanks. And the other thing I was thinking was, in terms of like people who should get that acknowledgement, Jessica Faust at the Southern Review is an excellent editor
She's
on that
amazing.
front.
Yeah.
Annalena Phillips Bell at Acatone, she does it.
Yeah.
James Smith at Southern Poetry Review, like those. I want to send my best stuff to them because I know that they're willing to do that with the poems. Yeah, there are some people out there who do it exceptionally well.
The editors of the now unfortunately defunct Gettysburg Review, I would include in.
Is that now defunct? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
unfortunately, yeah.
James Matthew Wilson. I submitted a couple poems to him last year, and we had a really nice back and forth, talking not just about formal elements, but about the substance of the poem. And it was a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad that you have connected with him, because he definitely drives me crazy, but I think the kind of intelligence he has and the temperament that he has are such that I think you would be able to get a lot out of those conversations, and you would be less inclined to be driven crazy by them. I'm glad that's happened. I want to ask you a lot. This is like this is like a bank shot. I want to ask you, because you started listening to Sleep Rickets a little while ago, and you were therefore aware that, as I've told Ryan a number of times now, as in like Orson Welles in The Third Man, Ryan is now a third act man, where he has been so much prepared for and so much discussed and praised and insulted on the podcast that I'm curious if you obviously know him, and you talked to him plenty before now, but I'm curious, like, if you have any sense of what people might want to know about him, or yell at him about, or ask him finally coming on,
Or how he may be best insulted.
yeah.
I'm here for it.
I'm sure people would want to know why you've been hesitant to come on for so long, because you do obviously have such a wealth of knowledge. You're a good speaker.
It's because he knows me so well.
Yeah.
Part of it is I don't want a lot of attention, generally speaking. Part of it is I very strongly dislike the sound of my voice, and I guess the last part is, being an editor, I wanted to be in the background because it's not about me. The magazine wasn't about me. It wasn't for me. It was for the readers and writers, and the many, many, many wonderful readers and writers. And And I didn't want to make it about me, and I didn't want it to seem like it was about me, because it's not.
But you're also a poet. You can represent yourself as a poet as well.
Well, but I'm a firm believer in what Keats said, that the poet is the least poetic person around. And, I think I'm always interested to hear you or Maddie or Brian or David talk, but I'm enormously bored with myself. I don't.
You have to hold on. Well, that's just being selfish. All the rest of us want to hear you.
and that very well may be. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm happy to be here and doing this now, and I'm going to make a sound.
Open that.
I'm gonna make a sound.
Go and open it. I'm gonna
Make a delicious
Make sure
sound.
my batteries are looking good.
Are you? But you also, I don't know. Like all right. I have a shittier question to ask both of you, but you do seem like you may be happier, almost like running the show behind the scenes and then mailing in your poems from a distance. Like, I don't know. Like you're plenty charming, and you're like a very sweet person, but you also, I don't know. Like, I couldn't see you running for office, for example, right? Like, I don't see you being like happy in a super public-facing role.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I don't have any political ambitions.
or like, I don't know,
He's here to announce his candidacy.
or like being a preacher, or being a door-to-door salesman.
I don't know. I've actually had. I mean, there was an awful long time where I didn't think I was going to be able to get an academic job, teaching, and I thought about going to seminary.
Yeah.
That was something that was potentially interesting to me.
I feel like you'd be in like a research position.
Yeah.
Like,
I probably would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, or maybe you just be an exorcist. But you only talk. you only talk to demons and not people.
With all this bosh around us in this room.
I don't feel what Ryan was saying about not wanting attention. I'd love some attention,
From the demons.
Yeah. Whoever's willing to throw it my way. But I guess I do feel more confident celebrating the magazine and other people's stuff than being the center of attention, maybe. Yeah.
Right, so here's the shittier question then, along those lines. You're both good poets. You've been sending out poems for a long time. You've established plenty of relationships. All that said and acknowledged, it has been a theme on the podcast that poems tend to be accepted for reasons independent of their quality. In what way has each of you found that your role as editor-in-chief has affected your submissions? Like, in what way have you found yourself publishing more or less, or being solicited, or having one kind of relationship or another with reading series editors, with whoever, or magazine editors, at least correlated to your role as editor-in-chief of a magazine? No effect at all, or?
I think minimal effect.
Really?
Somebody tonight was telling me that they personalize all of their cover letters, and they've got comments to say about all the things they've loved in recent issues. And maybe
That's
one
crazy.
thing that's crazy. Yeah, it's one thing that I
You
would.
have that much time.
And nobody reads them. Like,
That's right.
I guess it's nice when someone in their cover letter says they loved such and such poem, but you also don't really believe them that they did anything more than look at the table of contents or
I
something.
don't believe someone loved my poem when they're writing me an acceptance letter for that poem. Like, I never.
So I don't think a cover letter is like a
accept.
place where you're going to get meaningful feedback
No.
on the quality of the previous issue. So I don't do any of that in cover letters, but I don't know how much of a difference. I mean, because I am arrogant in some ways, I tell myself that, like, of course you're right. Poems get accepted for all these other reasons rather than their quality. Except for my poems. They are winning hearts all over America. And
Right.
America's sweetheart, David Clark.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Like your poems are like women always lie to men about their dick size, but not to me.
right.
All right. That seems about right. Ryan, nothing has shined through the experience other than your own poetic genius. Or... Has it made a difference?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, well, first is that I write many fewer poems because I don't have the time or the energy or the creative that cathexis is redirected at other people's stuff, and in a lot of ways that's rewarding. But what it means is I get asked for things far more than I can respond to with good faith. I could send a bunch of garbage to people when they ask, but...
Which is the usual thing, which is what most people seem to do when solicited.
Well, I mean, my feeling is, it may or may not be garbage either way, but when I know it's garbage, I'm not going to send it to anyone. And I'm very slow composing, and as some of y'all know, I think, I don't send anything out until I've let it sit for at least a year. And the one exception I've ever made to that rule was the poem that David fixed that line for me with 32 and was kind enough to run.
So what was the one at the beginning of the
It was the beginning of, it was 2020, and it felt timely, and I felt like I needed to send it then. But so it's very slow, and I don't have a lot of things in the hopper at any given time. And when people ask for poems, they generally don't want translations, which it's easier for me to produce with some rapidity.
You can clock into a translation in a way that
to some extent. And it's easier, for me to write a poem. There's a prefatory experience that is, something like what Augustine calls deificare in otio.
Translate.
Well, I mean, it's really hard to translate because it sounds insane. It sounds like to be made God in leisure, but what it means is to spend time in contemplation, to have leisure time for contemplation that is not directed at any particular activity, and by the contemplation of the works of God to become ideally more godlike. That's what Augustine means. Well, I don't want to pretend to anything like that, but I need time for contemplation, at least, before I can write a poem. And before I translate, I don't have to have that. Right. I still need some. I still need some juice out there. But it doesn't take nearly as long. So yeah, I mean, the differences are that some people seem now to have heard of me, which was not the case previously. And some people now tend to ask me for things, which was not the case before. Now, the only person until I was editing LM who ever asked me for anything was John for 32 back in the day. And I was crazy about, they just run Alicia's, is it Ultrasound? Is that the title from. And I was just thinking, oh my goodness. I mean, I got a letter from John. He wants me to send things. I thought I figured everything out. This is like 2007. Yeah. And he promptly rejected everything that I sent him, and rightly so. I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't. But so it's nice being asked for things, and it means that I haven't sent anything out unsolicited in a long time. Which is, obviously, in some ways, it's quite pleasant for me because I'm not extremely extroverted. I don't have a great deal of prestige-oriented ambition. There aren't, giants I'm trying to slay.
Sure. But you would say that since you have started editing LM, you've gotten a whole lot more solicitations, and like the quality of the work you send out has increased, if only by virtue of your having less time and more patience. But coincidentally, it's been a lot easier to get poems published out there. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the demand has gone up. The production has gone down.
Yeah.
In an inverse ratio.
Right.
And so it's a mixed bag. It's nice that some people seem to like the things that I do and have heard of me and asked me for things. It's very pleasant. But the downside is there's no time to write good stuff to send them. So it's hard because when someone asks, I feel so honored. I want to honor their generosity and give them something really good.
I got a very nice email from a poet recently who said, "I'm going to send you some new poems." Because I asked for some poems. He said, "I'm going to send you some new poems, and I promise not dregs!" Exclamation point. They will be dregs. Because that is so often what happens.
Right. Yeah.
So aside from having no time to write poems, what's been not so good about editing a poetry magazine or poetry, prose, etc. magazine for 8 years?
Have I told you my story about spreadsheets? No, I mean there's a great deal of important but tedious labor that goes into it, and that is deleterious to the creative impulse.
Yeah.
So I mean that's hard, and the exhaustion. I will give a pro tip to writers out there who
give it good stuff. That paper.
Right. All of my nervous tics are destroying the microphones. A pro tip is read the submissions guidelines and obey them. And
don't glance at them. Even get the vaguest idea of what
don't email me directly on Christmas Eve with your poems. Don't do that. Don't
this
email.
one's about Santa.
Brian, I wasn't going to reveal that it was you on Christmas Eve with... no.
I already rejected this last Christmas.
This Christmas is the miracle. Yeah, I'm going to take it. No. But yeah, I mean, realize that editors are people with lives and jobs and families and
those jobs are usually not being editor.
And usually you're not
being editor. There's a few exceptions.
Yeah. And be humane to editors. Cue the Sarah McLachlan music here, and we'll just show sad pictures of me and David and you.
And puppies,
But be humane to editors. Really, I mean that's a pro tip, because when you do send me something on Christmas Eve, like your Ebenezer Scrooge, I am not going to be inclined to accept it, because I am going to be less than enthusiastic upon receiving these poems.
You people have taken liberties with you as editor that have been surprising to me to hear about. Behind the scenes, the presumptuousness with which people will write to you sometimes is a little shocking. I notice you have very good editorial inbox hygiene, where like I have occasionally written to you like on behalf of someone else, and you will say, "I'm so excited to read this. Please do send it. Go to the submittable." You like I'm talking to David here. Like you are very good about like working hard to preserve the integrity of your inbox as much as possible. Because I can imagine, like Ryan, you get flooded with things that probably should not be going directly to your personal email.
Yeah, I delete all of them without reading them, unless it's somebody who I've already published. Yeah. And I kind of have a bad attitude about that. The person who we've published something of theirs, and then they are just going to skip the line from there on out.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy about that, but I do read those and of course respond to them and everything. But if it's somebody who I don't have a relationship with and they're just sending me an email, I get a couple of those every day, it seems like. And even when we're closed to submissions, I still get those in my inbox, and I just delete all of them and don't respond.
This is what I kept telling you to do, Ryan, and you were, yeah.
No, there's a fastidiousness or a compunction or something where I don't like to do that. I feel guilty. I should not. But I do, and so then I'm in a moral quandary because you've sent me poems on Christmas Eve, and I get more and more, unenthusiastic about the poems. So
a lot of those submissions, though, I don't think they even notice that I have never responded. It's part of it's a carpet bombing thing. They send it to me and 100 other people, and it's not like they're waiting to hear back from me. It's on Christmas Eve or whenever. They don't.
Yeah, they have a list that's BCC'd, and you and every editor in America. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an obituary for a friend's father I read a few years ago that included the line. It was actually a wonderful obituary because it was very true to who he really was. It was not just superlatives, but it said he was a soft touch, and like it struck me in that context as being the right kind of note to strike, because that can of course be a real character flaw, but it is also, I think it reveals something really sweet, and it is I know a lot of people, like most people I know of who know you or who know of you are intimidated by you. But you are also quietly under your sexy cop exterior, which is your current vibe. Like that is definitely your style at the moment. You're like, I'm wearing blue jeans and I rolled up my sleeve, so don't worry. I'm like,
the mustache too.
The shaved head with the mustache is definitely sexy cop. But you're underneath that. You actually are a soft touch, which is yeah. Which it was bad as like for your mental health as an editor, but is I think probably a sign of a heart of gold at some point.
That's very kind, except for maybe some of it.
Except for the part that wasn't funny.
Not sure about all. That is a thing, and it's a thing that is a bother. One should not abuse kindness just because one can. It seems to me a cruelty that we would be better off without.
A very small indication of this trend, which I received to a rejection I sent out recently. And I'm tapping my own microphone. And if this is somebody who listens to the podcast and you thought you were just writing to me as the person who's on the podcast, I'm sorry. I read it only as an editor, but I sent a rejection, a very nice personal rejection, and then got the reply back was, okay, who do you think would like these? Which again, like it was an innocent enough question, but like that kind of assumption that like, all right, well let's sit down and have a conversation about my poems sent out to an editor. For me, that was like one presumptuous email I received that day. For you, that was like an average, 5-minute span in your inbox.
Did you answer that email?
If you didn't answer,
I would have answered it. I would have answered it, except that Joanna was walking through the room at that moment, and she said, "You don't have to answer that." I'm like, "All right, okay, let's just delete it." But my inclination was like, "Okay, let me think." No, don't do that work. Don't figure out where you should submit these poems.
All right, so here's another pro tip to go with Ryan's earlier. I don't answer those emails, but clearly some people do,
yeah.
And every so often I will get a submission that in the cover letter is like, so and so rejected these poems, but they suggested 32 poems as a journal that might have lower standards that would be happy to publish them.
I should have said, here's David Clark's personal email address.
He's eager to hear from you.
He will delete this on read.
The other thing you were saying, Ryan, that I don't think you really fully did justice to was the way that reading a slush pile can kill your energy to write. Mm-hmm. If I want to sit down and start writing, there's a couple poets I can pick up and I spend 15-20 minutes reading their poems and it's going to start something. I think the opposite of that is reading the slush pile. And it's not the bad ones. The bad ones are, I love the really terrible submissions that I can glance at in a second, I move past them. But the competent, not wonderful poems, there's just so much of that. And to read, to try to read 50 competent poems and then sit down and do your own writing that seems really close to impossible.
Trying to write a poem after reading a slush pile is like trying to host a wine tasting after drinking a case of Diet Coke. It wasn't terrible, but I can't really. I have no sense of what makes a good line anymore.
I know.
So I completely get that as when you're talking about your own production, dropping as a result of all the work you've done as an editor.
Well, and I think Matthew's too. People probably don't have a clear sense of how invaluable Matthew has been to LM and how much he's done. It wouldn't have been around nearly so long without him, and it wouldn't have been nearly so good. And he made a lot of sacrifices without getting any credit.
You've given some pro tips, both of you, for submitters to magazines. Do you have advice to potential editors? I mean, for one thing, most people don't seem to want to edit. Maybe people want to edit magazines more than they want to say write reviews because there's some power and prestige that comes with it, at least theoretically. But it is. I mean, the big advice you got from Dave was, if you're going to do it, don't do it longer than 5 years. Should people edit magazines? What should be
I think it's a disposition.
Okay. Editors are born, not made.
Well, I was talking to Stefan, who runs Smartest Pace, a terrific magazine, and Stefan doesn't write poems, he's a blithe spirit, and it seems a thing that he's happy to do, and
bizarrely he's a judge.
Well, he's not anymore. No longer.
Okay, right.
No longer. But yeah, until 2012, he was a traffic judge.
Which makes no sense. But
very strange. But he's a lovely guy, and with his disposition, it doesn't encumber him, I feel like. And people, J.D. McClatchy did Yale Review for decades, and George Gore did Swanee Review for 50 years. An enormous. Some people have a disposition for it, and and God bless those people. I thought that I did when we were young, Maddie. In our 20s, I thought one day it would be fun to do a thing with a magazine. And I discovered over the course of doing it that it is contrary to my disposition, and so it was not easy. But I tried to do a good job. I don't know. I mean, I feel like, David, you don't seem overly encumbered.
I've taken some breaks a few times,
and that's right.
some other people on our team have guest edited issues, and I think it's about time that I need to do that again and take a semester off. But I think with both of the times that we've done that in the past, that our guest editors said, I don't want to ever do that again.
Right. It was like Heracles taking the dome of the sky on his.
Yeah. I think Shoemaker said something like, maybe 5 years from now you could ask again and I'd think about it, but they weren't saying give me another issue as soon as you can.
Right.
And in addition to that, the magazine is just poems, but you also do on the website. You do a fair amount of prose too, which then is, and I know because you've edited some of my prose. Like that's some serious work sometimes.
Yeah, we're doing less reviews now than we have at sometimes in the past because it's so much.
The interior,
the contributors' marginalia thing. But those are barely touched. That feels like one place where I'm fine just letting the poet speak, and I don't need to do much editing to that. It's something like that. If they say something that is like factually off, I might send them a note and said, I think this was happening in Venice, California, not Venice, Italy, or something like that.
Not
You know,
hell,
that's
like
not
you
where
wrote.
this poem was set. You know, that sort of note. But really, that's not taking any more work than just putting it in HTML and messing with the web design.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's about time to take another break, and that with regular breaks, I could do it for a while.
Yeah.
I'm still having a lot of fun doing it.
How many years have you been doing it, David? 12?
12 years?
Yeah.
Great.
In a way, like I would have been interested to see how you would have been if that had actually been your only job, or had been like that maybe plus like one of your other jobs had been your only jobs. But you had like 4 to 5 depending on the semester.
Yeah. At one point, I had 6 this spring.
And you also like JD McClatchy. I have plenty of respect for. Like I know at least for some of the years he was doing the Yale Review, he was, let us say, hands off. Like he might not have been grinding out the hours every single day that you were with LM on every single aspect of it. At least that was the impression I got. I also definitely like submitted poems there that would get rejected 3 years later.
Yeah, no, that they could be slow, but you know, he did a terrific job for a long time, and that's a service to the literary community that, you know, I think is really admirable. Yeah, I don't know. You're right that I've just been overworked generally for a very long time, and so maybe that's some of it. But at this point, you know, my very, very banal joke is that I'm retiring to go be a full-time professor.
Yeah.
But that's what it genuinely feels like that.
Another blessing for me has been that I share it with Elizabeth, my wife, and that's brought me a lot of pleasure too, that we travel together to AWP and do things like that. And especially the last several years, I guess throughout the time that we've been doing 32 poems, we've had young children, and this is like an adult thing that we can share. So like that's been really valuable to us, and I think having a good team also makes it easier. A lot of the associate editors we don't get to see, but once or twice a year we'll see at a conference or something. But Brian joined us for our staff dinner this past year.
Yeah, I was so thrilled to be invited. It was such a good time. The highlight of my AWP experience, including being part of a panel, which was a wonderful panel. Like, it was a great experience. These things are not always wonderful. But anyway, but the
hanging out with that team, and
that's right.
the people that you share the project with, and I think it's just hearing you two talk about the way things have been going with Literary Matters.
Yeah.
That even if the job itself is an awful lot of work, that's a sustaining side of it, is to share it with people who you really admire and respect, and you get to have pretty deep conversations about the things that you love as much as you love anything.
We didn't do a lot of that. But yes, I mean, lots of credit to Joanna and Caitlin and Jeff and Rafi and all the people who pitched in behind the scenes and made it happen. And, you know, there's a huge debt to Ernie Suarez and Rosanna Warren, who gave me a chance to do a thing. And, you know, they were always in the back of my mind, along with Dave, as, you know, people I wanted to respect what we were doing with LM. So hopefully, you know, they did, and I feel fortunate to have had a chance to do it and to interact with, you know, so many of my heroes, and, you know, both dead and living, and make new friends and meet people, and, you know, overall a very positive thing, even though it was difficult at times in lots of ways.
We'll give Brian a few years off and then see if we can get him to guest edit an issue of 32 poems.
Here.
Yeah, my suspicion is that you will be a little bit like one of those chain smoking like DC political operatives who who like retires for the sake of his heart, and then 6 months later is like, all right, bring me let me get, I gotta get my fix. So yeah, my suspicion is there may be some editing in your future, but I imagine probably not of the scope and duration of LM.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a gig that's opening up that I know about which I will be discreet, but I would be a much easier gig, and I am not entirely averse to throwing my hat in the ring for that. But really, the editing I'm looking forward to now is the new editions of Dryden's Virgil, which should be out next summer, that I'm doing with Wise Blood Books. Editing books of somebody who's been dead for 300 plus years.
Couple people who've been dead.
Yeah, a couple of and the Virgil thing, right? It's a little easier, I think, on me. But yeah, I mean, the door isn't closed forever, I don't think. But it would have to be a much less strenuous position.
What and Wise Blood? Remind me. There's like, because there's a whole Catholic poetry mafia that I have only a kind of a loose notion of. There's Wise Blood. There's Dappled Things as a magazine.
Right.
Are they also affiliated with? Do they also have a press?
No. So, Dappled Things was started by Bernardo Aparicio, and now is edited by Katie Carl, who is a very fine fiction writer, and who is affiliated with UST as well.
Okay.
She's teaching it. And Joshua Wren, one of the co-founders with James Matthew Wilson of the MFA program at UST, founded Wise Blood Books, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago, and has worked feverishly to publish a lot of really very good things. And, it's exciting. There is a kind of boom.
But Wise Blood is also what James Matthew Wilson works on? Or?
No.
Okay. Isn't he affiliated with some press or some?
Well, James has a series which published Proteus Bound. So with Franciscan UP, he has a series called Colosseum Books, of which he's editor, and then he's the poetry editor at Modern Age.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Very busy. All these folks.
Oh yeah. No, I don't doubt it. Because we should wrap it up in a second. Just because it's something I think we totally disagree about, and I figure I can just drop a grenade right at the end of our conversation.
Excellent.
I think Catholics should be more like Jews when it comes to cultural stuff. Like, I think, there's no Jewish community center in the country that would not welcome, what's his name? Saffron Foer, or like, when Philip Roth was alive, or like Brian Platzer, like a secular Jew who for whom this is definitely a part of his identity, for whom this is definitely part of who he is, but who is not necessarily practicing, not necessarily, even faithful, but, who is unquestionably Jewish and who does participate in a Jewish literary tradition. Like that is the sort of thing Jewish community centers and even synagogues across the country love to embrace, love to be part of. Catholics, as the Catholic cultural world has gotten a little more robust in recent years, I think that there's a real missed opportunity in only incorporating practicing, believing Catholics. Because at least for me, that is definitely part of what it means to be Catholic, but by no means is it all of what it means. Like, it is certainly, this is a self-serving fantasy that I have, but I am not a Christian, but I'm 100% a Catholic. Like, that's going to be part of who I am regardless. And I think that is, I know you and I have different thoughts on that, but to me it seems like even if you do want to preserve certain arenas for the faithful, for the practicing, for the believing, it seems like that's a real missed opportunity.
Well, there are different approaches.
Some right, some wrong.
So something like the Catholic Imagination Conference, which will be at Notre Dame in October, is precisely what you're describing. So far as I know.
I've never heard of that.
It's a very, very broad operation. So far as I know, I can't speak with any authority on it. I'm not particularly involved in it. They had me out one time, and I think I will be there in October for the launch of the anthology that I co-edited with April Lindner, Contemporary Catholic Poetry. And I would say that in that book, there was something more like what you're talking about. So people have different approaches. Institutions have different approaches. And, you know, is there the right way? Is there the wrong way? That's over my head. I don't have the answer to that.
Wise Blood does a good job of that too. They don't just publish poets who blast the catechism.
Yeah.
They tend to have a wider view.
I don't know. And I know he's been in fact, like, that he has been so good to you makes me think more highly of James Matthew Wilson. I still imagine he would want to, like, rifle through my wife's medicine cabinet before publishing me.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. I told him to read Midlife, and I think he's got it now, and I think he'll admire it greatly.
Well, yeah. Well, so I won't try to arm wrestle you into saying something about James Hadley Wilson, because again, what the things he's done for you have made me very grateful to him, and very. I think he's definitely doing some good in the poetry world, at least as far as as his affiliation with you. Goes.
Well, and he has no involvement with Wise Blood. I mean, he's been published by them, but he doesn't run the show there.
Right.
And he's published me. I mean, I'm not a Catholic.
Right.
Yeah.
And my poems are not even orthodoxly Jewish. So.
Right.
All right. We'll see.
Well, I mean, at our summer institute next week, the poets we're looking at are Richard Wilbur and Anthony Hecht.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So.
All right. Well, yeah. So and
not
it also
Catholic among them.
Things may be changing and opening up.
Yeah, just don't send the Ligotti-inspired poems.
None of the ones about the hotel where I'm staying, Brian. I took a photo of one of the nightmare cherubs that's on the it's like this little gargoyle putto here. This is a really beautiful, comforting image of a little baby angel in the corner of the hotel.
Yikes.
You just imagine that staring up at you from the cradle.
It looks like something a child would make in middle school art class or something like that. Yeah.
Like in a movie where they would be bringing the child's drawing to the psychiatrist to decode. It would be
Damien made that, or the kids on the tricycles in The Shining.
Mm-hmm. We'll see. It'll maybe a while before I brave James Matthew Wilson's inbox.
Well, I'll say that in my experience, he's a lovely guy. He's a very, very brilliant guy. He's enormously impressive and enormously.
He's super smart and super well read, and I've known that since I remember reading his criticism when I was in grad school.
Yeah. With CPR, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And as I say, I think he, will disagree with you about many things as I do, but I also think he'll see how amazing your poems are. I mean, he's a really good reader. He's a really good writer. He's a really good thinker. So,
and he'll appreciate how formally pristine your poems are.
Sorry. I think that was the adjective used by Joseph Salemi. So I think it's not comforting. That was the time I accidentally published in the White Supremacist magazine. It was not on purpose. It was an accident. I'm definitely not saying James Matthew Wilson is a white supremacist. You heard it here. James Matthew Wilson is not a white supremacist.
No,
or rather, I'm not saying he is.
Oh no.
How did you accidentally publish?
No.
Because
that's really not the person who I want telling me who's a white supremacist and who isn't.
My work was solicited I looked up the magazine. It turned out that they only featured online the non-white supremacist poems that they published. And I asked Alex Pepple if I should send there, and he said, "Oh, people have different opinions about it. Just, it's up to you." And if Alex Pepple tells me that, I'm like, "Well, okay, all right, I'll send him something." He asked for some stuff, and then I got the fucking issue, and I was like, he was reprinting passages from Lothrop Stoddard. Like, Jesus Christ. And then Leo Yankovic writing just some openly racist poems. So yeah, I think he called my verse pristine. He really liked that there were no substitutions in it, which feels, in retrospect, should have been more of a red flag than it was. All right, I'll give you the chance to return the non-favor. Since you have been such a third act man, are there any? I know you have a couple. You're so technologically inept. You've only been able to listen to the podcast occasionally,
right,
by having someone crank your phonograph manually. But
the dog is on a bicycle powering,
with a bone swinging on a string in front of him.
That's right.
But based on your impression of the kind of the moral character of the kind of person who listens, any advice, any recommendations other than stop listening and go read a book? Any
advice
wisdom?
or recommendations to your listeners,
or insults, or
No. What on earth would I say? If you're interested in poetry and you're listening to Matthew Buckley Smith, you're doing a smart thing.
All right. Okay.
I've taught Slee Ricketts a couple times in class. I've assigned students to listen to an episode.
Yeah, that feels like that could get you in trouble with the administration. Do you have tenure? I forget.
That's the benefit.
All right.
That's what they say. Now you can assign Slee Ricketts.
Yeah, that's the lore.
Right.
It goes around. Yeah.
You get the big bucks, and
Yeah, glad to know.
So, Maddie, did you ever read James's book? I think it's The Vision of the Soul. Did you ever read this?
No, what is it?
You should read this.
Okay. He had a book of, a 2-part book of criticism. Was that this?
No. That was
an anthology
Fortunes
years
of Making.
Okay,
This was the book after that, the prose book after that.
Okay.
And you should read it.
What is it? A book of essays about poetry? Is it?
It's not even a book of essays in the way that I'm collecting essays for a book. It's a book.
All right.
With a complete vision.
Okay.
And
it's like a theologico-aesthetic treatise.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really good. And you may not may not agree with everything, but it's really good.
Okay.
And I just want to give a lot of credit where credit is due, and I feel like James may have been vilipended on this show in the past that I don't know about, but
I've given him grief a number of times on the show, but we also took some time to read an essay of his. And,
Okay.
But Ryan's not responsible for the grief. I also can't imagine he would ever listen to this show. But if he did, because you were on this episode, then Ryan's not responsible for any grief I've given to James. That's all. Nor is Elijah. Brian.
It's all Brian Brodeur's
Brian
fault.
Brodeur told me to say every mean thing I've ever said. All right. Parting shots. Anybody?
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for hosting us.
This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for
Elijah.
letting me
Thank
be
you.
Thank
here.
you, Elijah. Yeah.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to have you all here and get a chance to talk and to hear you talk. And the fact that this is happening in my dining room is a real privilege and an honor.
All right. With luck, any of this audio will be usable. I would say coin toss. Right, that was my conversation with Ryan, David, Elijah, and Brian. Thank you for listening. I do hope you go check out all of their work, and as well as the archives of Literary Matters, the new, including the new issue, and 32 poems, which has come up plenty on the show before, but is worth a look. Thanks for listening. You can reach me as always at sleerickets@gmail.com. And happy birthday, Philip Metris. It's July 4th. The day we celebrate every year as the day Phil was born. So he's going to be coming back on the show soon. Happy birthday, Phil. And everybody else, good night.